Now, from the Signature Bank Studios.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy and our friend Selena Zito writing over the Washington Examiner. 7 months ago, according to the Pennsylvania Department of State, Democrats still held a lead over Republicans in voter registration in a southwestern Pennsylvania county that for generations was the heart of the working class voter. These are blue collar, steel mills, fabrication plants, railroads, barbershops, mom and pop grocery stores. This is Selena Zito, who hails from Pittsburgh,
right,
describing this area of Pennsylvania. 7 months later, according to the Pennsylvania Department of State, the Democrats have fallen behind. They now trail Republican registration by more than 1,000 voters. This is in Beaver, Pennsylvania. But that's only half the story. Sean Parnell, former Army Ranger who served in Afghanistan and ran for Congress, now lives in Beaver County. He told her, tapping into those voters and getting them to vote by mail is equally important. Parnell is running a project whose goal is to steer a major turnaround in Republicans' vote by mail operation in this year's election cycle, and he is doing so in conjunction with a couple of other Republican, PACs, basically, to register Republicans and build a statewide mail-in ballot initiative in Pennsylvania. So that's pretty encouraging. I mean, it's a recognition of what, in part, was the lack of infrastructure in swing states or states that could be a swing state for Trump, at least, and particularly in 2024. But to give us a sense of how things are going broadly, at least broadly in those swing states that will matter coming down the stretch. We're pleased to be joined by Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, former Virginia Attorney General, and former Deputy Secretary of DHS as well. Ken, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be with you guys.
Give us perspective on Pennsylvania, if you have anything to add to what Selena Zito is reporting, and the vote by mail piece of this more globally.
Yeah, so starting at the literally top level, if you compare where we are to 2020, which is what people think about mostly in their head, I'd give America a D grade for that election. And I think we're at around C+, B- now across the country, which is actually a very significant improvement. We still have plenty of work to do. But things like you described with Sean Parnell are a big deal in capitalizing on the safer environment. We now have to compete and beat the Dems, both in voter registration, so I was encouraged to hear your reporting on that, and in actually converting those people to voters, especially early voters. And that's still a cultural issue with Republicans. You think about Arizona in 2022, our folks waited till Election Day. A quarter of the polling places in Maricopa County, which is the biggest county in Arizona, couldn't handle the numbers. Printers running out of ink, all this kind of thing. And so we got log jammed by waiting to the last second. And we could go into a lot of the failure of Maricopa County. There's plenty to talk about there. But it makes competitive sense. If we want to win, so if you're listening and you want to win, you should be voting as early as you can. First of all, from plain old cheating, people using your name to vote, if you've already voted it, they can't do that. But in a state like Pennsylvania, where we've made limited progress, we've gotten rid of Zuckerbucks, we've got a good ruling out of the Third Circuit, the federal court there, which leans Dem, by the way, and still ruled our way on one of the lawfare efforts by the left to kind of knock the rules around the way they did in 2020, and the Third Circuit knocked them back. And part of the reason for that is one of the ways we've closed the gap on the right is we have more capacity to litigate now than we ever have before. And the left has been doing this for literally 20 years, since the 2004 presidential election. They have been engaged in all of the activities to take as much advantage of the process of the election as possible, which is what you and I are talking about right now. And we're playing catch up, but we have caught up in, we've closed the gap in a lot of areas. They still outspend us, they out a lot of things. But you just reported, and it's not the only place in the country, that Republicans, Arizona is another place, are out registering voters. That is a huge, huge change and a very, very big deal.
So, Ken, you said we're at a D.
Now those people got to be converted to early voters.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. You said that we were at a D.
So
how do
we were.
Well, how do we get to the C or the B or A, maybe even an A?
So we're at C plus B minus now.
Okay.
3.5 years later. And to get to an A, let's talk about Pennsylvania. We were talking about Sean Parnell. Pennsylvania has a terrible activist left-wing Supreme Court. They will deliver the Dems what they want in lawsuits, and they have. It didn't help that the Republican legislature effectively passed a law kicking the door open to mail-in voting, even though their Constitution explicitly forbids it. And their left-wing Supreme Court promptly threw away 150 years of precedent to say, yeah, that's perfectly constitutional. So, we can blame our own folks for that one. They gave the Supreme Court the opportunity to do that. But we got rid of Zuckerbucks. We have been litigating a lot of the small elements of mail-in balloting that make it more or less secure, and we've been doing well in those lawsuits. Despite the Supreme Court. Some of them have been in federal court. So these are ways to improve things in Pennsylvania that have happened. We also have recruited election officials there, which we learned in Virginia in 2021, where we recruited about 4,000 new, really they self-recruited. They just stepped forward, got trained to become election officials. And when I say election officials, I don't mean helping the campaigns. I mean literally working for the local election officer to run the poll books, to count the ballots, to oversee the mail-in ballots. We are still behind in this area to the left, but we have closed the gap. And this is something everybody listening to us, Dan and Amy, everybody listening to us can do this right now. You can be an election official. Your local election office hires enormous numbers of citizens to run the election. If you have the least bit of concern about election security, and I hope you do, then you can help solve the problem. You can do your bit, and you'll actually be paid to do it. These are paid jobs. This is not volunteer work. They'll train you. We can get outside training that our allies have prepared. The Election Integrity Network does this. People can go to whoscounting.us and sign up and get trained. But that is the single biggest thing that people listening to us can do. They can actually affect this whole issue area. And in Pennsylvania, we've been recruiting more of those folks. There's been a lot more attention, I can tell you as a former attorney general, that it isn't punishments that deter people or the actual probability of being caught. It's their belief that they're likely to be caught or seen doing bad things. And because there's so much more oversight now, there's a lot less opportunity for people who would do bad things to actually do them and get away with them. So we are in a better place, C plus, B minus, but we've got voter rolls to clean up. We've got election mail-in ballots to get voter ID improved on. Again, I'm talking about Pennsylvania here. I mean, if we talked about Illinois, the list would be a lot longer, right?
Well, but I mean, so nut this out for us. In the swing states that matter. North Carolina, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, maybe Trump expands the map, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania. taking all these metrics that you were describing into consideration,
Yep.
I mean, do you have like a rank order priority of most buttoned up to least buttoned up, most confidence in the fair administration of the election versus least confidence, where we're strong and where there are still substantial problems that maybe the polling
Yes.
that would belie the
Yeah.
polling?
Yes. So we'll do bad news first among the swing states. Michigan has gotten worse.
Really?
Michigan passed what amounts to their own little H.R. 1, which was the federal takeover of election attempt that failed by the Democrats. But they did it by referendum, by lying to voters, frankly. They wiped out voter ID. They did a bunch of other things. Michigan has gotten worse, and the GOP is a complete mess there. So, lining people up to get inside the system has become harder. So Michigan's worse. Nevada is the worst state to begin with. They're just so sloppy and awful at running elections. But we're making headway there. The RNC just filed a lawsuit in the last few days to clean up a certain aspect of mail-in balloting. The same lawsuit in Virginia 3 years ago was won by our side. We're hoping they win it in Nevada, sorry. And we also, Chuck Muth runs a spectacular voter roll cleanup effort in Nevada. And I start with those two states because those are the two that among the swing states really are the worst. All the others have improved. All the other swing states have improved. You asked for the rank order, Dan. Georgia and North Carolina have probably improved the most. North Carolina just passed a couple of months ago sweeping election reforms. It took years for them to pull it off. This has been a battle in North Carolina for over a decade, and it took a Democrat flipping to become a Republican and giving them the veto-proof margin they need to override Governor Cooper's vetoes of election integrity legislation. And it took all the Republicans sticking together to vote for it, and they dramatically improved election security in North Carolina literally in the last couple of months. Georgia did it in 2021 and 2022. Of course, I've been on your show and we've talked about Georgia before because of the explosion from the left. Oh, Jim Crow 2.0, and
Right.
it's so racist to clean up election systems. And what was the result? And this is important for people to hear. The result after the 2022 election, the University of Georgia did a survey. So a left-wing university did a survey and found 0% of black voters dissatisfied with the election process. Zero. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And the white and black voters were within a couple of tenths of a percent of being happy with those changes, 72-point-something% each, almost identical. The whole racial excuse of opposing this stuff was a big fat canard. It always is. They just call us racist to try to keep us from doing it.
And think of how many
and
black businesses lost
tremendous.
because they moved the Major League Baseball
Oh
All-Star
my
game out
gosh,
of there.
incredible.
I mean, it crushed
Yeah, from a
businesses.
50% black city to a 10% black city. It was stupid.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Even
So
for their goals.
Illinois is gone, but what can we do? My liberal friends last election cycle were election judges in Wisconsin. So,
Yep.
like, why are you getting involved in that?
We
But
need more
now,
there.
okay, so how can we help? Because I've got some time.
No,
on
we
my
are,
hands.
and we've gotten rid of ballot drop boxes. We'll see if they stay gotten rid of, because their Supreme Court flipped. You guys were following that election and reporting on it, and the Supreme Court has actually skipped their appellate court to bring a case back up. So it's very clear that they just intend to rewrite Wisconsin election law and reinstitute ballot boxes. So that's terrible. I will say this. Zuckerbucks is gone by referendum in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania were probably the two worst states in doing us harm with Zuckerbucks in 2020. And it has been wiped out by vote of the people. The governor kept vetoing the Zuckerbucks bans, and Zuckerbucks, for folks, are the $400 million that Mark Zuckerberg put into nonprofits. So he got a tax deduction for this. And then they funded election offices overwhelmingly in Democrat areas, and the election offices did voter turnout, which is what parties are supposed to do. And the data shows that Zuckerbucks alone flipped the election from Trump to Biden because of how those dollars were deployed and the turnout differences. And the 5 cities of Wisconsin were terrible. Green Bay, Madison, et cetera. They were the worst. And they're looking at ways to get around this, but the people have spoken, so to speak, and now there's a major impediment to the left using this tactic again in Wisconsin. So things have improved in Wisconsin as well. They're going to get a little bit worse here when the Supreme Court puts drop boxes back in place, but there's still going to be the Zuckerbucks ban, and in Wisconsin, that made a very big difference. And we have been recruiting for years election officials in Wisconsin and training them, and we're going to try to put another push on here over the summer to do the same thing. So Wisconsin is a big deal. It's a high priority. It's one of the tightest states in the country, election after election after election. We know the other side's focusing on it, but so are we.
All right, very good. Well, it's pretty encouraging. The grades are improving, so you can keep your cell phone.
Grades are improving.
Yeah,
yes.
we won't take your cell phone away. We
Thank
won't
you.
ground you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, former Virginia AG, former Deputy Secretary of DHS. Ken, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Hey, always good to be with you guys.
Thank you, and hopefully the RNC in Milwaukee might help. And Ken joined us on our turnkey .pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app.